Look, have you ever noticed how the quietest person in the room is almost always the most powerful? Think about it. In every meeting, in every group, in every situation, the person who speaks the least is the one everyone watches. The person who never raises their voice is the one whose words land the hardest. The person who stays completely silent when others expect a reaction, that person controls the entire dynamic. Not by force, not by aggression, by silence. It feels strange, but it's not magic. It's psychology, and today we're going to break down exactly why quiet people control every situation they walk into. Not the nervous kind of quiet, not the shy kind of quiet, the stoic kind, the deliberate kind. The kind that makes other people lean in, second-guess themselves, and give you exactly what you want without you ever having to demand it. This is the psychology of stoic silence. And by the end of this video, you will never look at a quiet person the same way again. Let me start with something most people get completely wrong. When you think of a powerful person, what do you picture? Probably someone loud. Someone who commands the room, someone who talks fast and talks a lot, someone who never stops asserting themselves. That's the image modern culture sells us. The loudest voice wins. No, that's not power. That's noise. And noise is actually the opposite of control. Real power is quiet. Real influence is measured. Real authority doesn't need to announce itself because it doesn't need approval. And the science backs this up completely. There is a psychological principle called the law of least effort. In social dynamics, the person who appears to exert the least effort, who seems calm when others are anxious, who stays quiet when others are scrambling to fill silence, that person is automatically perceived as the one with the most resources, the most options, and the most confidence. Because effort signals need. And need signals weakness. When you are constantly talking, constantly reacting, constantly explaining yourself, you are showing the world that you are working hard to maintain your position. You are revealing that you are not comfortable with silence. You are showing that you need the approval that comes from being heard. But when you are silent, deliberately and calmly silent, you are communicating something very different. You are saying, I don't need this. I don't need to justify myself. I don't need to fill the space. I'm completely comfortable here, in the silence, in the uncertainty, in the space that makes everyone else uncomfortable. And that comfort, that is what other people read as power. The first idea is this: silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is the most powerful form of communication. We've all been there. You're in a conversation and someone says something that stings, something unfair, something dismissive, something that tests you. And every instinct in your body is telling you to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to explain, to react. And when you do, when you react immediately, when you defend, when you explain, you hand all of your power to the other person. Because now they know exactly how to move you. They know your triggers. They know your pressure points. And they will use that knowledge again and again. But what happens when you don't react? What happens when you simply look at them, stay completely calm, and say nothing? The silence lands like a weight. Think about it. You've seen this happen. Someone makes a rude comment at a dinner table, expecting to get a rise. And the person they directed it at just looks at them, completely expressionless, and says nothing. What happens in that room? Every single person at that table is now looking at the person who made the rude comment. The silence has reversed the social pressure. The person who was trying to provoke is now the one who looks small. That's the power of a controlled non-response. Psychologists call this strategic silence. And it is one of the most effective social tools in existence. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He was the Roman emperor, arguably one of the most powerful men who ever lived. He wrote in his private journal, what we now call meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And this philosophy shows up in how the Stoics approached communication. They believed that every word you speak is a commitment. It is a position. It is something that can be used against you or for you. And therefore, words should be chosen with extreme care. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born into slavery and became one of the most respected thinkers of his era, taught his students something simple and devastating: be more silent than talkative. He wasn't saying to be antisocial. He was saying that most people fill silence with words that don't serve them, and every unnecessary word is a small leak in your power. Here is a real example. Two executives are in a salary negotiation. The first executive states their number and immediately starts explaining why they deserve it. They list their accomplishments. They justify the figure. They keep talking because the silence feels dangerous to them. The second executive states their number, then stops, says nothing, lets the silence sit there between them. What happens? The first executive has revealed their anxiety. They've shown that they are not entirely sure they deserve what they're asking for. Their words, meant to strengthen their position, have actually weakened it. Because strength doesn't explain itself. The second executive has communicated certainty through silence. They've made it clear. This is my number. I don't need to justify it. And psychologically, the person across from them begins to believe it too. Research from Stanford confirms this. In negotiation studies, the person who speaks after nomming a figure, who breaks the silence, almost always concedes more. The silence itself creates a social pressure that most people feel compelled to fill, and whoever fills it first gives away the most. Second, silence makes you appear more intelligent than speaking ever could. There's a cognitive bias called the halo effect. When you are calm, measured, and selective about when you speak, other people fill in the blanks about your intelligence with positive assumptions. They assume you are thinking deeply. They assume your quiet is wisdom. They assume that when you do speak, it will be worth listening to. This is not manipulation. This is psychology. People construct narratives about others based on signals. And the signal that quiet people send, deliberate, calm, unhurried, is one of depth. Compare this to the person who speaks constantly, who has an opinion on everything, who never pauses to think. Even if some of what they say is brilliant, the signal they send is desperation. The signal is, I need you to see me. I need you to validate what I'm saying. I need attention. And attention-seeking at a primal level reads as low status. We've all been there, sitting next to someone at a meeting or a dinner, and they never stop talking. And somewhere in the back of your mind, despite yourself, you start to think, they seem insecure. They seem like they need something from this conversation. Now think of someone you know, maybe one person comes to mind, who almost never speaks unless they have something specific to say. And when they do speak, the room changes. People lean in. The conversation shifts. Because this person has, over time, trained everyone around them to pay attention. That's not charisma. That's conditioning. Stoic silence conditions the people around you to value your words because you don't waste them. Another truth. The person who controls silence controls the room. There is something called the power pause. It is used by leaders, therapists, skilled negotiators, and court attorneys. After asking a question or making a statement, they pause. Not because they are thinking, but because the pause itself exerts pressure. The human brain is wired to fill silence. Evolutionarily, silence in a group often signaled danger. So we evolved to be deeply uncomfortable with silence and compelled to break it. Skilled communicators know this and use it deliberately. When you ask someone a question and then stay completely silent, watching them calmly, they will almost always over-explain. They will fill the silence with information they didn't plan to share. They will reveal more than they intended because the silence felt unbearable to them. This is why the most skilled interviewers and interrogators are the quiet ones. They don't pepper people with rapid-fire questions. They ask one question, and then they wait, and they wait. And the discomfort of that silence pulls out everything the other person was trying to hold back. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone asked you a question and then just stayed silent, looking at you, waiting, and you started talking way more than you meant to? Started explaining yourself, filling in gaps, over-justifying. That was not an accident on their part. That was power. Now the most important part. Stoic silence is not passive. It is the most active form of self-discipline. Here is where most people misunderstand this concept. They think quiet people are just naturally quiet. They think silence is a personality trait, that some people are just born reserved and others aren't. And that's where they get it completely wrong. Stoic silence is a practice. It is a discipline. And it is hard. I used to be the opposite of this. I used to respond immediately to everything. Someone would say something, and before they even finished the sentence, I was formulating my response. I was so afraid of appearing slow, so afraid of losing the thread of a conversation that I never actually listened. I was always preparing to speak. And when I finally spoke, I was speaking before I had processed anything. And it showed. Real silence, the kind that gives you power, requires you to do something most people cannot do. Sit in discomfort without acting on it. Someone insults you. You want to react. Stoic silence says, wait, feel the impulse, let it rise, and then let it pass. And in that space between impulse and action, choose deliberately what you want to communicate. This is exactly what the Stoics call the logos, the space between stimulus and response. They believed that our freedom as human beings lived in that space. Every animal reacts immediately to stimulus. A dog barks when threatened. A cat runs when startled. But a human being, if trained and disciplined, can pause, can choose, can respond rather than react. And that pause, that choice, that deliberate space, that is where all real power lies, Seneca wrote. Retire into yourself as much as you can. He wasn't talking about physical isolation. He was talking about the discipline of pulling back from the automatic, reactive version of yourself and choosing instead from a place of calm, deliberate intention. The first idea is the psychology. The second is the practice. The third, and this is where everything changes, is what silence reveals about other people. Here is something most people never realize about Stoic silence. It is not just a tool for your own power. It is one of the most accurate diagnostic tools in human relationships. When you go quiet, deliberately, calmly, consistently, you begin to see people for exactly who they are. Because silence forces other people to show themselves. Think about it. When you are always talking, always reacting, always filling the space, you control the surface of every interaction. You curate what people see, you perform, and so does everyone around you. Every conversation becomes theater, but when you go silent, the performance ends. Suddenly, other people have to decide what to do with the space you've left. And what they do tells you everything. Some people will become uncomfortable and immediately try to fill the silence. They'll joke, they'll explain, they'll overshare. These people are conflict avoidant and approval-seeking. They cannot tolerate uncertainty or ambiguity. They need everything resolved. They need everything smooth. And if you stay quiet around them long enough, they'll do almost anything to make the discomfort stop, including giving you whatever you asked for. Other people will become suspicious. They'll try to read you. They'll ask, "Are you okay?" Or, "Are you upset about something?" These are people who are anxious about relationships and particularly anxious about conflict. Your silence triggers their abandonment fears. And again, if you stay calm, they will almost always move toward you, not away from you. And then there's a third type, the rarest type. The person who matches your silence, who sits in it with you, comfortable and unhurried, not trying to fill it and not anxious about it. These are the people who have their own inner resources. These are the secure, grounded people. And you will know them instantly because the silence between you feels different. It doesn't feel tense or charged or filled with anxiety. It feels like understanding. This is one of the most valuable filters silence gives you. Because people who cannot sit in silence, who are compelled to fill it, manipulate it, escape it, are usually the people who cannot handle depth, accountability, or genuine connection. The silence doesn't lie. When you stop performing, you see who's real and who isn't. Another thing most people ignore. Silence is how you protect your energy. We live in a culture that treats speaking as a form of generosity. We're told to share, to open up, to be vulnerable, to communicate everything. And there is a place for all of that. But there is also a place for strategic privacy. Every time you over-explain yourself, you give other people the tools to argue with you. Every time you share your plans before they're complete, you invite doubt, criticism, and interference from people who may not be aligned with your goals. Every time you narrate your life in real time, on social media, in conversations, in groups, you are allowing others to shape your narrative before you've had the chance to live it. The Stoics called this the practice of guarding your inner citadel. Your inner world, your plans, your emotions, your doubts, your ambitions, that is your most valuable possession. And it should not be shared indiscriminately. Think about it this way. A chess player does not announce their next move. A general does not broadcast his strategy. A hunter does not make noise. Not because they are dishonest or secretive or manipulative, but because they understand that the power of an action lies partly in its unexpectedness. When people cannot predict you, they cannot control you. When people don't know your plans, they cannot undermine them. When people don't know your emotional triggers, they cannot exploit them. This is not coldness. This is intelligence. Real silence creates a boundary. Not a wall, a boundary. A space that belongs to you and only to you. And the people who are worthy of your trust will respect that space. They won't demand access to everything. They won't label your privacy as arrogance or coldness. They will understand that a person who protects their inner world is a person worth knowing. Let me give you a real example. Two people both have a goal they want to achieve. The first person tells everyone about it immediately. They post about it, they talk about it at dinner, they explain their strategy to anyone who will listen. And there's a rush to that, the social approval feels good. People say, "That's amazing," and "I believe in you," and it creates a sense of momentum. But then something strange happens. Studies on what's called goal-sharing psychology, particularly the research by Peter Galwitzer at NYU, show that when you tell people about a goal, your brain often registers a premature sense of completion. The social reward of being seen as someone pursuing the goal partially satisfies the need that was driving the goal in the first place. And so, paradoxically, talking about what you want to do makes you less likely to actually do it. The second person tells no one. They work quietly. They feel the discomfort of an unshared ambition, and they use that tension as fuel. They don't get the social reward of being cheered on, but they also don't get the subtle pressure, the self-doubt that other people's questions and doubts can create, and they don't burn off their motivation in conversation. They burn it in action. And when they succeed, the silence breaks on their terms. With results, not promises. Think about it. Who do you trust more? The person who announces everything they're going to do, or the person who simply does it? Second, silence in conflict is a form of warfare. This is something the Stoics understood deeply and modern psychology confirms. When you are in conflict with someone and you choose silence over reaction, you do not just protect yourself. You shift the entire power dynamic of the conflict. Here's why. Most conflict is sustained by reaction. Every time you react defensively, angrily, anxiously, you feed the conflict. You give it fuel. You confirm to the other person that their behavior is affecting you, which rewards their behavior and encourages them to continue it. But silence. Silence starves conflict. When you refuse to react, when you stay completely calm in the face of someone's aggression or provocations or manipulation, you do two things simultaneously. First, you remove the reward they were seeking. If someone provokes you and your anger is the reward they wanted, and you don't give them that, they don't win. The weapon becomes useless. Second, you force the conflict back onto them, because a one-sided argument is not an argument. It is just one person making noise. And if that noise generates no response, it becomes embarrassing. It becomes hollow. And the person making it begins to feel it, Marcus Aurelius wrote. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And what he meant was this. When someone is being reactive, impulsive, petty, the worst thing you can do in response is mirror that energy. Because then you have become them. You have allowed their worst impulses to pull out your worst impulses. And you've lost. But when you stay calm, when you stay stoic, when you stay silent in the face of their chaos, you win without fighting. You demonstrate in the most unambiguous way possible that their behavior has no power over you. And that demonstration is more powerful than any argument you could have made. Another truth. Quiet people create attraction. This is counterintuitive for most people, especially in a world that rewards extroversion so visibly. But the psychology is very clear on this. There is a concept called the principle of scarcity. We value what is rare. We want what is not easily available. And someone who shares everything freely, their emotions, their opinions, their reactions, is not scarce. They are abundant, familiar, predictable. But someone who is selective, who only speaks when they have something real to say, who doesn't perform for approval, who doesn't chase your attention, that person is rare. That person creates curiosity. That person makes others work for their attention and feel the satisfaction of receiving it when they do. This applies in romantic attraction, in friendships, in professional relationships, in leadership. The person who never reveals everything, who has depth you cannot quite reach, who is comfortable with themselves in a way that doesn't seek your validation, that person is magnetic. Not because they are playing games, because they are genuinely whole. And wholeness is rare. I used to chase someone hard once. I was always reaching out, always making plans, always trying to show how much I cared. And the more I reached, the more they pulled back, not because they were cruel. Because the dynamic I was creating gave them all of the power and gave me none. And power imbalance is not attraction. It is anxiety. The moment I stopped chasing. The moment I pulled back, got genuinely busy with my own life, and simply became less available, everything changed. Not because I was playing a game, but because I had finally started to actually build a life worth having. And the energy of someone who is living their own full life, who doesn't need you to complete them, that energy is the most attractive thing in the world. Real absence only works when you are actually building your life. This is the critical distinction. There are people who teach silence and withdrawal as manipulation techniques. They tell you to go cold, to ignore people, to manufacture distance to trigger anxiety in others. And yes, that works in the short term, but it is manipulation, and it will attract people who are triggered by anxiety and repelled by stability, which is not the relationship, career, or life you actually want. Real Stoic silence is not manufactured. It is the natural result of someone who is genuinely invested in their own growth. When you're focused, truly focused, on building something real in your life, the silence comes naturally. You're not ignoring people because you're trying to seem important. You're quiet because you're working. You're building. You're becoming. And that is a fundamentally different energy than performance. Now the most important part: how to actually develop Stoic silence in your daily life. Most people read about this concept and think, that makes sense, and then walk into the next conversation and do exactly what they've always done. Because reading about something and practicing it are completely different things. So here is how you actually build the discipline of Stoic silence, step by step. The first idea is to practice the pause before every response. Before you speak in any conversation, even a casual one, take one breath. That's all. One deliberate breath before you respond. This sounds too simple. It is not. What that one breath does is interrupt the automatic reactive pattern your brain has developed over years of conversation. It creates the tiniest bit of space between stimulus and response. And over time, as you practice this, that space gets bigger and bigger, until one day you realize you are choosing your responses rather than reacting with them. Second, get comfortable being the one who doesn't speak first. When you walk into a room, into a meeting, into a social gathering, practice not being the first person to speak. Just observe. Look. Listen. Let the room unfold around you without immediately inserting yourself into it. Notice what you learn when you're not performing. Notice how differently you see other people when you're watching instead of talking. And notice how, over time, when you do speak, the room adjusts to you. Another thing most people ignore: journal about what you chose not to say. Every evening, spend 5 minutes writing down moments in the day where you felt the impulse to speak and chose not to. What triggered the impulse? What would you have said? And what actually happened because you stayed quiet? This practice accelerates the rewiring of your responses faster than almost anything else because it makes the unconscious visible. The next step: practice silence in its most literal form. Every day, take at least 15 minutes of complete silence. No podcast, no music, no phone, just quiet. And when your mind generates thoughts, which it will, constantly, practice watching them without immediately acting on them. This is the foundation of Stoic philosophy, the idea that you are not your thoughts. That thoughts arise, and you observe them, and then you choose which ones to act on. And every time you sit in that silence and don't reach for your phone, you're training the exact same muscle you will use in conversations, in conflicts, in negotiations. The muscle of choosing response over reaction. Finally, build something real. This is the one that makes all of the others possible. Because Stoic silence is not sustainable as a performance. It is only sustainable as a byproduct of genuine self-respect and genuine purpose. If you have nothing in your life that you are building, no project, no skill, no relationship, no goal that is genuinely yours, then the silence will feel like emptiness. And you will fill it, because emptiness needs to be filled. But if you have a life that you are genuinely invested in, something that matters to you beyond the approval of others, then the silence becomes easy. Because you are not quiet because you are waiting to be seen. You are quiet because you have more important things to do than perform. This is the final truth, and it is the one that contains all of the others. Every psychological technique we've discussed today, the power pause, the non-reaction, the principle of scarcity, the deliberate withholding of response, all of it is sustainable only when it comes from a place of genuine internal wholeness. When you actually don't need the approval, actually don't need the validation, actually don't need to win the argument, because you are genuinely okay with or without it. That is Stoicism at its deepest level, not the performance of not caring. The actual absence of the need to perform. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the most powerful empire in the world, wrote his private journal not to be read, but to remind himself every day of what actually mattered. And what he returned to again and again was this: That external things, the opinions of others, the outcomes of situations, the noise of the world, those things are not in your control. What is in your control is your response, your inner world, your values, and the discipline with which you live according to them. Quiet people understand this, not because they were born that way, but because at some point they discovered something the loud world doesn't tell you, that the person who controls their own reaction controls every situation, every room, every relationship, every negotiation, every conflict, not because they are louder, not because they are more aggressive, not because they have more power in any external sense, but because they are free from the need that makes most people predictable. And freedom is the only real power, because the strongest position in life is not needing someone, but choosing them. Not needing to speak, but choosing to. Not needing to react, but choosing your response from a place of absolute calm. That is Stoic silence. And now you understand exactly why quiet people control every situation.